The clock struck 7 as Alexander Knight adjusted his black tie one last time. Standing in front of the mirror in his penthouse, he looked every bit the powerful CEO that financial magazines loved to hate. At 32, he had built an empire that most people could only dream of. His company, Knight Industries, was worth billions, and his reputation for being ruthless in business was well earned. Tonight was the annual City Charity Gala, an event Alexander attended every year. Not because he cared about charity, but because it was good for business. The right handshake, the right conversation, the right photo opportunity. These things mattered in his world. He slipped on his watch, a piece worth more than most people's cars, and headed out into the night. Across town, 26-year-old Lily Chen was having a very different evening. She stood in the small bathroom of the catering company, trying to fix her uniform that never seemed to fit right. Her reflection showed a young woman with kind eyes behind thick glasses, hair pulled back in a messy bun, and a nervous smile that she wore like armor against the world. Lily worked 3 jobs to pay for art school. During the day, she was a barista at a small coffee shop. In the evenings, she worked at a bookstore. And on weekends like this, she helped cater fancy events for rich people who looked right through her as if she didn't exist. Tonight's gala would be her biggest event yet, and she was terrified of messing up. "Chen, you're on champagne duty," barked her supervisor, handing her a heavy tray of sparkling glasses. "Try not to trip over your own feet tonight." Lily nodded, used to the harsh comments. Her co-workers often made fun of her clumsiness, but she needed this job too much to complain. She took a deep breath, balanced the tray carefully, and walked into the grand ballroom. The sight took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks. Men in expensive tuxedos and women in designer gowns moved around the room like they owned the world. Maybe they did. The whole scene felt like something from a movie, and Lily felt completely out of place. As she moved through the crowd, offering champagne to guests, she couldn't help but notice the stark difference between her world and theirs. These people talked about buying art pieces that cost more than her yearly rent, vacations to places she'd only seen in magazines, and business deals that could change entire industries. "Well, well, look who's here," came a familiar voice that made Lily's stomach drop. She turned to see Victoria Sterling, one of her classmates from art school. Victoria came from old money and never let anyone forget it. Behind her stood 2 other students, Jessica and Amanda, both sporting smirks that Lily knew meant trouble. "I should have known you'd be working here," Victoria continued, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I mean, where else would someone like you fit in at an event? Like this?" Lily felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm just doing my job," she said quietly, trying to move past them. "Oh, we know," Jessica chimed in. "It's so sad, really. While we're here as guests, you're serving us. I guess some people are just born to serve others." The word stung, but Lily had heard worse from them before. She tried to focus on her work, moving toward a group of businessmen who were deep in conversation near the auction display. That's when she saw him. Alexander Knight stood at the center of the group, commanding attention without even trying. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see everything. When he spoke, everyone listened. When he moved, people stepped aside. Lily had seen his picture in business magazines at the bookstore where she worked, but in person, he was even more intimidating. She approached the group carefully, offering champagne from her tray. Most of the men barely glanced at her, taking glasses without acknowledgement. But when she reached Alexander, something unexpected happened. He looked directly at her, and for just a moment those sharp eyes softened. "Thank you," he said simply, but his voice was surprisingly gentle. Lily nodded, feeling a strange flutter in her chest. She turned to leave, but Victoria's voice rang out again from across the room. "Look, everyone, it's our little artist," Victoria announced loudly. "She thinks she's going to be the next Picasso, but she can't even afford proper art supplies." Laughter rippled through the nearby crowd. Lily felt every eye in the vicinity turn toward her. Her face burned with shame as Victoria continued her public humiliation. "Tell them about your studio," Victoria pressed on. "It's actually just the storage room above her coffee shop. How romantic. Lily's hands began to shake. The champagne glasses on her tray started to rattle together, creating a soft chiming sound that only made everything worse. She tried to back away, to escape to the safety of the kitchen, but her feet seemed frozen to the spot. "That's enough," came a cold, commanding voice. Alexander Knight had stepped forward, his presence immediately changing the energy in the room. The laughter died instantly as people realized who was speaking. "I'm sorry, Mr. Knight," Victoria stammered, clearly not expecting this intervention. "We were just having some fun with our friend here." "Your idea of fun seems to involve cruelty," Alexander replied, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had built his empire. "I find that particularly unattractive in a person." Victoria's face went pale. Being publicly criticized by Alexander Knight at a charity gala was social suicide in their circle. Jessica and Amanda had already started backing away, not wanting guilt by association. But Alexander wasn't done. He turned to Lily, who was still frozen with her tray of champagne, looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "I believe you were offering champagne," he said to her, his tone completely different now, warm and almost protective. Lily nodded wordlessly, extending the tray toward him with trembling hands. That's when disaster struck. Her nervous shaking finally got the better of her, and the tray tilted just enough for several glasses to slide off. Time seemed to slow down as champagne and crystal went flying. The glasses shattered on the marble floor with sounds like tiny explosions, and the golden liquid splashed everywhere, including all over Alexander Knight's expensive tuxedo. The entire ballroom went silent. Every conversation stopped. I turned toward them. Lily stood in the middle of the mess, champagne dripping from her hands, pieces of crystal at her feet, staring in absolute horror at what she had done. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Everyone expected an explosion. Alexander Knight was famous for his temper and business dealings. Men twice Lily's age had been reduced to nervous wrecks by his anger. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the storm, but it never came. Instead, Alexander looked down at his ruined tuxedo, then back at Lily's terrified face, and did something that shocked everyone in the room, including himself. He smiled. Not a polite social smile, but a real one that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "Well," he said, looking at the champagne stain spreading across his jacket. "I suppose that's one way to make an impression." Lily blinked in confusion, certain she had misheard. What?" "The champagne," Alexander continued, his voice gentle and almost amused. "It's actually quite good, though I usually prefer to drink it rather than wear it." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but most people were still too stunned to react. This wasn't the Alexander Knight they knew from business headlines. "I've ruined your suit," Lily said, her voice shaking. "It probably costs more than I make in a year." "It's just a suit," Alexander replied, and the simplicity of those words somehow made them more powerful than any angry outburst could have been. "But you look like you're about to cry, and that seems far more important than dry cleaning." Lily stared at him, completely bewildered. In her world, accidents like this led to lost jobs and angry lectures. In his world, she assumed they led to lawsuits and public humiliation. But here he was, being kind to her when he had every right to be furious. "Let me help you clean this up," she said, frantically looking around for something to use. "The staff will handle it," Alexander said firmly but not harshly. "But I think you could use some air. Would you like to step out onto the terrace?" Lily looked around the ballroom. Victoria and her friends had disappeared, probably hoping to avoid any further association with the disaster. The other guests were starting to return to their conversations, though she could feel their curious glances. The catering supervisor was glaring at her from across the room, clearly planning her termination. "I should get back to work," she said, weakly. "I'll probably be fired anyway, but I should try." "You're not going anywhere near that kitchen tonight," Alexander said with quiet authority. "Not while you're shaking like a leaf." He was right. Lily's hands were still trembling and her heart was beating so fast, she felt dizzy. The combination of public humiliation, accident, and now this unexpected kindness from the most powerful man in the room had left her completely overwhelmed. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him with confusion clear in her eyes. "Why are you being nice to me?" Alexander paused, seeming to consider the question seriously. The truth was, he didn't understand it either. Something about this clumsy, genuine young woman had cracked through walls he'd spent years building. Maybe it was the way she'd tried to defend herself against those cruel girls without fighting back. 3 days had passed since the charity gala, and Alexander Knight couldn't get the clumsy girl with kind eyes out of his head. He sat in his corner office on the 40th floor, staring out at the city skyline, but his mind kept drifting back to that moment when she'd looked at him with such genuine terror and confusion. Most people who worked events like that were used to dealing with wealthy clients, but she had been different. Real, as he'd told her that night. He'd never asked for her name. That bothered him more than it should have. Alexander was a man who prided himself on details, on knowing everything about everyone in his orbit. Yet he'd let this girl walk away without even learning what to call her. His assistant had tried to get information from the catering company, but they'd been oddly protective of their staff details. "Sir?" His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock meeting is here." Alexander shook his head, forcing himself back to reality. He had a company to run, deals to close, and a reputation to maintain. One awkward encounter at a charity event shouldn't be occupying so much of his mental space, but it was. Meanwhile, across town, Lily was having her own problems focusing. She stood behind the counter at Sunrise Cafe, mechanically making lattes and cappuccinos while her mind replayed the events from Saturday night over and over again. The way Alexander Knight had looked at her, the gentle tone in his voice. The fact that he hadn't destroyed her life when he easily could have. "Earth to Lily," called her coworker Jake from behind the espresso machine. "You've been stirring that coffee for 5 minutes straight. I think it's mixed." Lily looked down at the cup in her hands, realizing she'd been lost in thought again. "Sorry," she mumbled, sliding the drink across the counter to the waiting customer. The morning rush was always crazy at Sunrise Cafe, but today felt different. Lily kept glancing toward the door every time the bell chimed, though she couldn't explain why. What were the chances that a billionaire CEO would ever set foot in a tiny coffee shop in this part of town? 0, she told herself. Absolutely 0. That's why her heart nearly stopped when Alexander Knight walked through the door at exactly 11:30. He looked different in the daylight, wearing a simple gray sweater and dark jeans instead of his formal tuxedo. But those sharp eyes were unmistakable, and the way he carried himself still screamed power and confidence. Several customers turned to stare as he approached the counter, clearly recognizing him from business magazines and news reports. Lily felt her hands start to shake again, just like they had at the gala. Can I help you?" she managed to stammer. Alexander smiled, and once again it transformed his entire face. "I was hoping to get a coffee recommendation from an expert." "I'm not really an expert," Lily said quickly. "I just work here." "You make coffee every day, don't you?" "That makes you more of an expert than me. I usually just drink whatever my assistant brings me." There was something about his tone that put Lily slightly at ease. He wasn't talking down to her or acting like she was beneath him. He seemed genuinely interested in her opinion. "Well," she said, feeling a little braver, "if you like strong coffee, the dark roast is really good. But if you want something smoother, the medium blend is my favorite." "Medium blend it is," Alexander said. "And whatever pastry you'd recommend to go with it." Lily's eyes widened. "You want a pastry recommendation too?" "Why not? You seem to have good taste." As Lily prepared his order, she could feel Alexander watching her. Not in a creepy way, but like he was genuinely curious about her process. When she handed him the coffee and a blueberry muffin, their fingers brushed for just a moment and she felt that same strange flutter from the gala. "Thank you," Alexander said, taking a sip of the coffee. His eyebrows raised in surprise. This is actually excellent. You sound shocked, Lily said with a small smile. I am, honestly. I've been drinking overpriced coffee from fancy places for years, and this is better than most of them. Alexander found an empty table in the corner and sat down with his coffee and muffin. Instead of pulling out his phone or laptop like most business people did, he simply sat there, watching the rhythm of the cafe. Lily tried to focus on other customers, but she kept glancing over at him, wondering why he was really there. The lunch rush came and went, and still Alexander sat in his corner, occasionally getting up to order another coffee or ask Lily about different menu items. By 3 o'clock, the cafe had emptied out except for a few regulars with laptops and Alexander at his table. "Excuse me," came a familiar voice that made Lily's blood run cold. She turned to see Victoria Sterling standing at the counter, flanked by Jessica and Amanda. They were all dressed in expensive workout clothes, probably heading to or from some exclusive gym that cost more per month than Lily made in wages. "Well, well," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "If it isn't our little artist still playing coffee shop girl." Lily felt her stomach drop. Having these three show up at her workplace was like her worst nightmare coming true. "Can I get you something?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, we're not here to buy anything," Jessica said with a laugh. "We were just in the neighborhood and saw you through the window. We wanted to see if you'd recovered from your little accident at the gala." "What accident?" Amanda chimed in, though her grin said she knew exactly what accident. "Oh, that's right. You dumped champagne all over Alexander Knight. How mortifying that must have been." Lily could feel her face burning with embarrassment. Several customers looked up from their laptops, clearly interested in the drama unfolding at the counter. "I heard the catering company fired you on the spot," Victoria continued. "Not that anyone was surprised. You've always been such a klutz." "They didn't fire me," Lily said quietly, though it was barely true. She'd been told not to expect any more weekend gigs, which amounted to the same thing. "Oh, how generous of them," Victoria replied mockingly. "I'm sure they kept you around out of pity, just like how your art professors keep giving you passing grades even though your work is—" She made a face like she'd tasted something sour. "That's enough." The voice came from behind them, cold and sharp as a knife. All four girls turned to see Alexander Knight standing there, his expression completely different from the gentleman who'd been asking about coffee recommendations. This was the CEO who'd built an empire, the businessman who could destroy companies with a single phone call. Victoria's face went white. "Mr. Knight, we didn't see you there." "Clearly," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. "Otherwise, I assume you wouldn't be harassing this young woman at her place of work." "We weren't harassing anyone," Jessica said quickly. "We were just catching up with an old friend." Alexander's eyes moved between the three girls and Lily, who was standing behind the counter looking like she wanted to disappear. "Is that what this is? Friendly conversation?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Victoria opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly trying to think of something to say that wouldn't make things worse. "I think you should leave," Alexander said finally. "All of you." "But we haven't done anything wrong," Amanda protested. "You're disturbing other customers," Alexander replied, gesturing to the people with laptops who were indeed staring at the scene. "And more importantly, you're being cruel to someone who's just trying to do her job." Victoria's face flushed red, but she was smart enough to know when she was beaten. "Come on, girls," she said, trying to maintain some dignity. "Let's go somewhere. With better coffee anyway." As the three girls left, shooting dirty looks back at Alexander and Lily, the cafe felt like it could breathe again. The laptop customers returned to their work, and the normal sounds of coffee brewing and quiet conversation returned. Alexander walked back to the counter where Lily stood, still looking shaken. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle again. Lily nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. "I'm fine. Thank you for that. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Alexander said firmly. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that, especially not at work." "They're from my art school," Lily explained. though she wasn't sure why she was sharing this with him. They've never liked me much. Their opinion says more about them than it does about you, Alexander replied. Art school, though, so you're an artist. Lily's cheeks reddened. I'm trying to be. I'm not very good yet, but I'm learning. What kind of art do you do? Mostly paintings. Landscapes, some portraits, nothing fancy. She paused, then added quietly. Victoria was right about one thing. I can't afford proper supplies most of the time. I do paint in the storage room upstairs sometimes when the shop is closed. Alexander felt something twist in his chest at the sadness in her voice. Here was someone with dreams and talent, working 3 jobs just to pursue her passion, while people like Victoria threw money around without thought. Would you show me sometime? He asked. Your paintings, I mean. Lily stared at him in shock. You want to see my art? Very much. But why? You probably know real artists, famous ones with galleries and everything. Alexander considered his answer, carefully. Because, he said finally, I have a feeling your art is like you. Real. That evening, long after Alexander had left the cafe, Lily found herself thinking about his words. Real. 2 weeks had passed since Alexander started visiting Sunrise Cafe regularly, and their conversations had become the highlight of Lily's days. What started as simple coffee orders had grown into long talks about art, life, and dreams. Alexander would sit at his corner table during the afternoon lull, and Lily would join him during her breaks, slowly opening up about her world while he shared glimpses of his. Today felt different, though. Lily had been quieter than usual, and Alexander noticed the dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there before. Rough night? He asked, as she brought him his usual medium blend. Lily managed a weak smile. Just tired. I picked up some extra shifts at the bookstore. 3 jobs is a lot for anyone, Alexander said gently. When do you find time to paint? I don't, really, Lily admitted, sinking into the chair across from him. The cafe was empty except for one regular customer in the corner with headphones on. I haven't touched my easel in over a week. Alexander frowned. Something was wrong, but he could tell Lily wasn't ready to share what it was. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd learned to read her moods, the way her shoulders tensed when she was stressed, how she bit her lower lip when she was thinking hard about something. What Lily didn't know was that Alexander had been quietly working, behind the scenes to help her. It had started small. He'd used his connections to ensure she got better shifts at the bookstore, ones that paid slightly more. Then he'd anonymously paid off her outstanding student loan debt, making it look like a clerical error in her favor. He'd even arranged for one of her paintings, which he'd convinced her to show him the week before, to be accidentally discovered by a gallery owner friend who'd expressed genuine interest. He told himself it wasn't manipulation. It was just evening out the playing field. Someone with Lily's talent and heart deserved better than working herself to exhaustion just to survive. There's something I need to tell you, Lily said suddenly, breaking into his thoughts. Alexander's attention snapped back to her face. She looked nervous, almost scared. I got a call this morning, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. From the Riverside Gallery downtown. They want to display one of my paintings in their new artist showcase next month. Alexander felt a surge of pride even though he knew he'd helped orchestrate this opportunity. Lily, that's incredible. That's one of the most prestigious galleries in the city. I know, she said, but instead of excitement, her voice was filled with confusion. That's what I don't understand. I never submitted anything to them. They said someone recommended my work, but they won't tell me who. And then there's this other weird thing. She pulled out a letter from her purse, her hands shaking slightly. My student loan company says there was an error in their system. Apparently I don't owe anything anymore. The debt just disappeared. Alexander kept his expression carefully neutral, though inside he was concerned. He'd hoped she'd see these changes as positive developments, not sources of stress. Maybe you're just having a run of good luck, he suggested. But that's just it, Lily said, looking directly at him with those honest eyes that had captured his attention from the beginning. I don't have good luck. I'm the girl who spills champagne on billionaires and trips over her own feet. Good things don't just happen to people like me. The pain in her voice cut through Alexander like a knife. How had she been made to feel so worthless that she couldn't believe she deserved good things? Maybe it's time you started believing you deserve better, he said softly. Before Lily could respond, the cafe door chimed and Victoria Sterling walked in with her two friends. Alexander saw Lily's face immediately close off, her shoulders tensing in that familiar way. "Oh, look who's here," Victoria announced loudly. "Our little coffee girl and her mysterious friend." This time, Alexander didn't wait for them to start, their usual routine. He stood up immediately, his full height and commanding presence filling the small space. "You have two choices," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire. "You can order something and leave quietly, or you can leave now. But you will not harass this woman again." "We're not harassing anyone," Jessica said, though she took a step back. "We just came to congratulate Lily on her sudden good fortune." Victoria smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "Yes, we heard about the gallery showing. How unexpected. And the student loans too. My father works in finance, you know. He says debt doesn't just disappear unless someone with serious money makes it disappear." Alexander felt his blood run cold. These girls were smarter than he'd given them credit for and more dangerous. "What are you implying?" Lily asked, though her voice was small. "Oh, I think you know," Victoria continued, enjoying the moment. "Someone's been playing fairy godmother to our little Cinderella here. The question is, what does he want in return?" The words hung in the air like poison. Alexander watched as doubt crept into Lily's eyes, the same doubt he'd seen when she'd talked about her luck earlier. "Get out," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." "We're just looking out for Lily," Amanda chimed in with fake concern. "She's so innocent, she might not realize when someone's trying to buy her affection." I said, "Get out." Alexander took a step forward, and something in his expression made all three girls back toward the door. "Think about it, Lily," Victoria called over her shoulder as they left. "Ask yourself why all these good things are happening right after you met him." The silence that followed was deafening. Lily sat frozen at the table, staring at the door, where the three girls had been. Alexander could see her mind working, connecting dots he'd hoped she'd never connect. "Lily," he said gently, sitting back down. She looked at him then, and he saw something in her eyes that broke his heart. It was the look of someone who'd been given hope and was now watching it crumble. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Alexander closed his eyes. He'd known this moment would come eventually. He'd hoped to find the right way to tell her, to explain his reasons, to make her understand that his feelings were real, even if his methods had been questionable. Some of it, he admitted. The confession hit Lily like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "How much is some?" Alexander looked at her face, saw the trust he'd been building for weeks starting to crumble, and made a decision that went against every business instinct he'd ever developed. He decided to tell her the complete truth. "The student loans. I had them cleared. The gallery showing. I know the owner, and I showed him pictures of your painting. He loved it, but I arranged the introduction. The better shifts at the bookstore. I made some calls." With each confession, Lily seemed to shrink further into herself. When he finished, she was staring at the table, tears silently streaming down her face. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you deserved better than what you had," Alexander said, leaning forward, desperate to make her understand. "Because you're talented and kind, and you were working yourself to death just to chase your dreams. Because He stopped, realizing he was about to say something that would change everything. "Because you what?" Lily looked up at him, and the pain in her eyes was almost unbearable. "Because I care about you," he said simply. "More than I've ever cared about anyone." Lily stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "I need to go." "Lily, wait." "No." she said, backing away from the table. I need to think. I can't do this right now. She grabbed her purse and headed for the employee area, leaving Alexander sitting alone at the table. He put his head in his hands, realizing that in trying to give her everything, he might have just lost the only thing that had ever truly mattered to him. Jake, who'd been quietly making coffee throughout the entire exchange, approached Alexander's table. For what it's worth, Jake said quietly, she talks about you all the time. Whatever your reasons were for helping her, she cares about you too. But Lily's been hurt before by people who had money and thought they could control her life with... Alexander looked up. What do you mean? Her ex-boyfriend from art school. Rich kid who thought he could buy her love. When she wouldn't play along with being his pet project, he made her life hell. Got her kicked out of shows, turned people against her. Jake shrugged. She's scared of being someone's charity case again. Understanding dawned on Alexander like a cold sunrise. No wonder Lily had reacted so strongly. In trying to help her, he'd accidentally repeated the pattern that had hurt her before. As he left the cafe that afternoon, Alexander realized that, for the first time in his life, money couldn't fix the problem he'd created. The only thing that could repair the damage was something he'd never had to rely on before. Faith that someone could love him for who he was, not what he could provide. But first he had to prove to Lily that she was worth more than any amount of money he could ever spend on her. For 3 days, Lily avoided every place she thought Alexander might find her. She called in sick to the cafe, picked up extra hours at the bookstore, and spent her evenings walking aimlessly through the city streets, trying to sort through the mess of emotions in her head. The problem wasn't just that he'd helped her without telling her. The problem was that she'd started to believe in herself again, started to think that maybe she really was talented enough to deserve good things. Now she didn't know what was real and what was just Alexander's money making things happen. On Thursday evening, she found herself standing outside the Riverside Gallery, staring at the poster advertising their new artist showcase. Her painting was listed among the featured works, and seeing her name in print should have filled her with pride. Instead, it just made her feel empty. Second thoughts? Lily spun around to find Alexander standing behind her. He looked terrible, tired, worried, and somehow smaller than she remembered. Gone was the confident businessman who commanded every room he entered. This man looked like he hadn't slept in days. What are you doing here? She asked, taking a step back. Looking for you, he said simply. Jake told me you'd been asking about the gallery, and I thought you might come here. Jake had no right to. Don't blame Jake. I've been going to the cafe every day since you left, hoping to see you. He was worried about you too. Lily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling cold despite the warm evening. I don't know what to say to you. Then let me talk, Alexander said, moving closer but being careful not to invade her space. Please, just 5 minutes. And then if you want me to leave you alone forever, I will. Something in his voice made her nod. They walked to a small park across from the gallery and sat on a bench under a streetlight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I need you to understand something, Alexander began, his voice quiet but steady. I've never done anything like this before. I've never cared enough about another person to want to change their life. But that's exactly the problem, Lily interrupted. You changed my life without asking me. You made decisions for me like I was some kind of project. You're right, Alexander said, and the simple admission surprised her. I handled everything wrong, but I need you to understand why. He turned to face her fully, and in the lamplight she could see the vulnerability in his eyes that he usually kept hidden. I've spent my entire adult life building walls, he continued. I learned early that people want things from me. Money, connections, status. So I kept everyone at arm's length. It was safer that way. Lily found herself listening despite her anger, hearing something in his voice she'd never heard before. Then I met you, Alexander said, and for the first time in years someone looked at me and didn't see dollar signs. You saw just me. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? But then you went and made it about money anyway. Lily pointed out, though her voice was gentler than before. Because I didn't know how else to show you that you mattered, Alexander admitted. I've never been good at emotions or relationships. I'm good at solving problems with resources and connections. When I saw you struggling, when I saw how talented you were but how the world wasn't giving you a chance, I did what I always do. I tried to fix it. Lily stared at her hands. Do you know why those girls at art school hate me so much? Alexander shook his head, sensing she was about to tell him something important. Because 2 years ago I dated someone like you. Not as wealthy, but rich enough. His name was David, and he was everything I thought I wanted. Handsome, successful, interested in my art. She paused, the memory clearly painful. He started helping me too. Bought me supplies, got me into shows, introduced me to important people. Alexander felt his stomach drop, beginning to understand where this was going. I thought he loved me, Lily continued. I thought I was finally getting the recognition I deserved, but it turned out I was just his pet project. He liked the idea of discovering and shaping a struggling artist. When I started getting confident, started having my own opinions about my work, he didn't like it anymore. What happened? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. He destroyed me, Lily said simply. Got me blacklisted from galleries, turned other students against me, spread rumors that I was only getting opportunities because I was sleeping with him. Victoria and her friends believed every word because it made them feel better about their own lack of talent. Alexander closed his eyes, understanding now why his help had felt like such a betrayal. Lily, I'm not David. How do I know that? She asked, finally looking at him. How do I know that when I start having my own ideas, when I stop being grateful enough, you won't get bored and move on to the next charity case? The question hung between them like a challenge. Alexander knew that anything he said would sound like empty promises. Words were cheap, and Lily had heard them all before. You don't know, he said finally. You can't know because I can't prove it with words. I can only prove it by showing you over time that I'm not going anywhere. But what if I can't trust you? Lily whispered. What if I'm too broken to believe that someone could actually love me without wanting to change me? Alexander reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he wrapped his fingers around hers. Then we figure it out together, he said. But Lily, I need you to know something. The student loans, the gallery showing, all of it. I'd take it all back if I could. Not because I regret helping you, but because I hate that it made you doubt yourself. What do you mean? Your painting got into that gallery because it's beautiful. Yes, I made the introduction, but the gallery owner chose your piece because it moved him. Your talent is real. Your worth is real. None of that has anything to do with my money. Lily felt tears starting to fall, and she didn't try to stop them. I was so scared that everything good that happened was fake. The opportunities might have come through my connections, Alexander said gently. But your talent filled them. No amount of money can paint those pictures for you or make you the kind of person who sees beauty in a storage room studio. They sat in silence for a while, hands linked, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Lily spoke. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to be with someone who can buy and sell entire companies. Our worlds are so different. They don't have to be, Alexander said. You've already changed my world more than you know. I used to think success was just about building bigger, making more money, winning at all costs. But these past few weeks, watching you find joy in small things, seeing how you treat everyone with kindness no matter how they treat you, you've made me want to be a better man. You're already a good man, Lily said softly. You were just lonely. Alexander laughed, but it was a sound filled with wonder rather than humor. How do you do that? How do you see the best in people even when they hurt you? Because I know what it's like to be misunderstood, Lily replied. And because I think we're all just trying to figure out how to connect with each other without getting hurt? Alexander brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I love you, he said, the words carrying all the weight of a man who'd never said them before and meant them. Lily looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the intimidating CEO or the wealthy benefactor, but the man who'd sat in her cafe every day just to hear her laugh, who'd defended her from bullies, who'd shared his loneliness with her like a gift. "I love you too," she whispered back. "And that terrifies me." "Good," Alexander said with a small smile. "It terrifies me too. That's how I know it's real." 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander's penthouse as Lily stood in front of her easel, completely absorbed in her work. Paint covered her fingers and somehow found its way onto her cheek, but she didn't notice. She was lost in the process of bringing her vision to life on canvas. Alexander watched her from the kitchen, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. Even after all these months together, he still found himself amazed by her passion. The way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the small sound of satisfaction she made when she got a color just right, the complete focus that transformed her from his sweet, sometimes clumsy girlfriend into a true artist. "You're staring again," Lily said without turning around, a smile in her voice. "Can you blame me?" Alexander replied, walking over to look at her latest painting. It was a cityscape, but not the cold, harsh version most people saw. This was the city through Lily's eyes, warm, full of life with hidden beauty in unexpected places. "It's incredible," he said, meaning every word. "It's for the exhibition next month," Lily said, finally stepping back to examine her work. "I still can't believe they asked me to do a solo show." This time, Alexander had nothing to do with the opportunity. Lily's talent had spoken for itself, and the art world was finally taking notice. Her first gallery showing 6 months ago had led to others, each one earned through her own merit and growing reputation. "I can," Alexander said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You're amazing, and the world is finally catching up to what I've known all along." Lily leaned back against his chest, feeling that familiar flutter of happiness that came from being with someone who truly saw and appreciated her. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. They'd had to learn how to navigate their different worlds, how to trust each other despite their past hurts, how to build something real together. Alexander had changed too. Gone was the ruthless businessman who saw everything as a transaction. He'd started using his wealth and influence to help others, not by controlling their lives like he'd mistakenly done with Lily, but by creating opportunities and letting people succeed on their own terms. His company had shifted its focus to include more charitable work, and Alexander found that success felt different when it was shared. "I have something to tell you," Alexander said, his voice carrying a nervous energy that made Lily turn in his arms. "What's wrong? You sound worried." "Not worried exactly. Nervous, maybe." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lily had learned meant he was trying to find the right words for something important. "Alexander, you're scaring me." "What is it?" "Victoria Sterling's father contacted my office yesterday," he said, watching Lily's face carefully. Lily felt her stomach drop. She hadn't seen Victoria or her friends since that awful day at the cafe, but she knew they moved in the same social circles as Alexander. She'd always worried that eventually their paths would cross again. "What did he want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "He wanted to discuss a business partnership. Apparently, Victoria told him we were dating and he thought it might be beneficial for our families to work together." Lily pulled away from Alexander's embrace, crossing her arms defensively. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that while I had no interest in doing business with him, I'd be happy to introduce him to you at our engagement party." The words hung in the air for a moment before Lily fully processed them. "Our what?" Alexander smiled, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I know we haven't talked about it yet, and maybe this isn't the most romantic way to bring it up, but Lily..." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I can't imagine my life without you." Lily stared at the box in his hands, her mind racing. 6 months ago, she'd been working 3 jobs and sleeping in a storage room. Now the man she loved was proposing to her in his penthouse, and somehow it all felt surreal and perfectly natural at the same time. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I'm still just me. I still spill things and trip over my own feet. I still don't know which fork to use at fancy dinners. Alexander laughed, setting the ring box aside and taking her hands in his. Do you know what I told Mr. Sterling about you? Lily shook her head. I told him that you're the most genuine person I've ever met, that you've made me want to be better than I was, that you see beauty in things other people overlook, and that includes seeing something good in me when I couldn't see it myself. Tears started to form in Lily's eyes. Alexander, I told him that you're not just the woman I love. You're the woman who saved me from becoming someone I didn't want to be. Alexander picked up the ring box again, this time dropping to one knee. So, yes, I'm sure. Lily Chen, will you marry me? Lily looked down at the man who'd started as a stranger at a charity gala, become a friend at a coffee shop, and somehow turned into the love of her life. The ring was beautiful, but not ostentatious. He'd learned to understand her tastes, and the look in his eyes was everything she'd ever dreamed of seeing from someone who loved her. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood up to kiss her, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around the way people did in movies. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. So, Lily said, admiring the ring on her finger, what exactly did Mr. Sterling say when you told him about our engagement party? He seemed surprised, Alexander said with a grin. I don't think he expected me to be so serious about the girl his daughter used to pick on. And Victoria, we'll have to learn to live with the fact that the girl she tried to tear down is going to be part of the same social circle she's desperate to belong to. Lily felt a moment of worry. Alexander, I don't want to be part of that world just for revenge. I don't want to become someone cruel. You couldn't be cruel if you tried, Alexander assured her. But you also don't have to hide from people like Victoria anymore. You have every right to take up space in whatever world you choose. 3 months later, their engagement party was the talk of the city. But not for the reasons people expected. Instead of the stuffy, formal affair most people anticipated, Alexander and Lily had created something uniquely theirs. The party was held at the art gallery where Lily's first painting had been displayed, surrounded by local artists' work and filled with people from all walks of life. Lily wore a simple but elegant dress that made her look like a princess without hiding who she really was. Alexander stayed by her side all evening, but not in a possessive way, in a way that showed the world he was proud to be there with her. Victoria, Jessica, and Amanda were among the guests, invited by mutual acquaintances who had no idea about their history. Lily watched them arrive, perfectly dressed and looking every inch the wealthy socialites they'd always been. For a moment she felt that old familiar fear creep up her spine. Then Alexander's hand found hers and she remembered who she was now. Not the scared girl who used to hide from their cruelty, but a successful artist engaged to a man who loved her exactly as she was. Ready? Alexander asked softly. Lily squeezed his hand and walked forward to greet their guests, including the 3 women who had once made her feel so small. As they approached, she saw Victoria's expression change from boredom to shock to something that might have been respect. Lily, Victoria said, her voice different from the mocking tone Lily remembered. Congratulations. I heard about your solo exhibition. That's really impressive. Thank you, Lily replied graciously. I hope you can make it. It opens next weekend. As the evening went on, Lily found herself surrounded by friends she'd made through her art, colleagues of Alexander's who genuinely enjoyed her company, and even some of her former classmates who wanted to reconnect now that she was successful. But the most meaningful moment came when Jake from the cafe arrived with a small gift, a coffee mug that read, "Real artists drink real coffee." For all those times you'll be too busy painting to make it to the cafe, he said with a grin. Later, that night as they stood on the balcony of Alexander's penthouse looking out over the city lights, Lily reflected on how far they'd both come. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The way things used to be? When you were just the powerful CEO and I was just the girl who brought you coffee? Alexander considered the question seriously. I miss the simplicity sometimes, he admitted. But I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. You've made me human again, Lily. You've given me a reason to use my power for something good. You've given me something too, Lily said, leaning against him. You taught me that I'm worth loving exactly as I am. You always were, Alexander said, kissing the top of her head. I just helped you see it. As they stood there together, surrounded by the life they'd built and the love they'd fought for, both of them knew they'd found something precious and rare. They'd found each other, and in doing so, they'd found the best versions of themselves. The ruthless billionaire had learned to love, and the girl who'd been bullied had learned to believe she deserved everything beautiful the world had to offer. Together they were writing a new story, one where love won, kindness mattered, and everyone got their fairy tale ending.